Sounds good. I like your setup.
It's the most, look at this. This chair goes back. It's like
Oh
a
wow,
very
it's a
comfortable
cool
lazy
thing.
one.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. Where are you based?
I am based in New York, but I'm currently in Ghana. I go back and forth, so I'm in Ghana
Oh,
right now. Yeah.
when did you get there?
I got there 3 weeks ago.
Wow. Okay. So you're spending
Yeah,
like,
yeah, but I'm Ghanaian, so it's like I have family here, so I just kind of do extended stays in both places
were you
now.
born there?
I wasn't. I was born in the States. I spent time earlier this year and last year bringing a festival to Ghana with Chance the Rapper and Vic Mensa. So it forced me to come back to Ghana more, and I just really liked working from here. So I said I
Wait,
might as well
what?
try a bit more. Yeah.
How did that come about?
Yeah, so I was in Ghana 2 years ago during December. December is like a really big like holiday and festival time here.
Yeah.
And Vic is Ghanaian. So I guess he was here as well. And funny enough, I guess we have a mutual friend. And so he was talking about producing this festival or creating this festival. And they were like, oh, you guys should connect. And interestingly enough, Chance decided to come to Ghana for the first time, I think a week after Christmas. And so he wanted to be involved, and it ended up being a great crew of folks, mainly from Chicago. I was the only one not from Chicago
Were you the
around.
organizer? Like you were doing the logistics?
So we ended up bringing in another producer. There was like five of us, including Chance and Vic, who like co-produced it. But halfway in, I realized we needed like another producer that was on the ground in
Yeah.
Ghana. They ended up being a godsend. Like none of us were in Ghana full time. There were so many logistics. Ended up being over 20,000 people. Ended up being over 20,000 people. Ended up being over 20,000 people.
Stop. No
Yeah, it
way.
was it was insane. So yeah, we did have an amazing producer that ended up helping us. I don't know how we would have got it done without him.
I my largest event I've ever hosted was 300 people, and we had a full-time producer, and that was still the biggest headache. I
It's a
cannot even
lot.
imagine what you're
It's
talking about.
insane for Stan. We did a conference. We did a conference in October before the festival, and that was about, yeah, like 100 to 200 people, I guess, give or take throughout the day. And the whole time I was like stressed, like, is everybody okay? Does anybody need anything? I don't think I could like actually like compute in my brain the scale until I saw all those people.
Do you have pictures? What was it called? Can I look it up online or something?
Black Star Line Fest. Yeah, yeah. You should be able to find it on
Say
Instagram.
it again.
Black Star Line Fest
Starline.
on.
Is this the stage? It's almost like an X shape or something in the
Yeah,
middle
yeah,
of.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Hold on, I'll reply to
Oh
it.
my. Oh my gosh. I just saw a picture of the crowd at night. Oh,
Yeah, it was insane.
I
um, so
cannot
yeah,
believe this.
insane. I have a lot of respect for festival organizers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much respect for them, like the Coachellas of the world and Wirelesses, Glastonbury's, like
Yeah.
showing up every year to do that again and again and again.
Yeah.
Kudos.
I skipped through earlier today the little parts from the episode with Dan Runcie.
Yeah,
And yeah, I heard you talking about the festival, but I did not realize. I mean, this is insane that you did this.
yeah, it was something.
Did you make money
Yeah.
or did you raise money
So
or
the
how, what was it?
festival is free. We explored raising some money with like startups, trying to appeal to like the African audience, but it was a bit tricky because in some ways, while like we had an idea, could reverse engineer who our audience was, you still didn't know who would show up. So in the event, like now, obviously we'd be in a much stronger position to raise money, but there was a lot of in kind support, whether from the government or just like people who wanted to be involved. And then the whole thing was free.
Yeah, because that venue is not cheap to
No,
get.
no, yeah, yeah.
And we are going to talk about not just startups this time, but how fandom and music is playing a role within the startup space and the emerging artist space. So, Denisha, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
It's funny. I discovered your platform, Stan, because I was looking for a solution for myself where I could bring together a small group of fans and try to build a community around the music I'm producing. And so I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole and started reading about you and saw that you had a Substack. There's some very, very interesting bits of data on there. But before we dive into kind of why you wanted to start this company, can you walk us through when you started that Substack and what is the transition from publishing your first article to where you are today? Because the connection is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, totally. So before starting Stan, the tech startup, I ran Stan, the Substack, I guess. I was actually at SVB, which now everyone knows, a Silicon Valley Bank at the time, working with early stage startups, and found that I had an increasing passion in startups in the entertainment space. But I also felt like I was struggling in some ways to connect with the founders, because while those were the founders I wanted to spend the most time with, they kind of were like, okay, like, what do you actually know about the music industry? And so I decided to write. And the first article I actually wrote was was my opinions on Spotify's acquisition of Gimlet and Anchor. And I published that on Medium, and it did really well. Or in my opinion at the time, what was really well. I think within the first week that I published it, had over 20,000 views. So many like executives at other companies reached out. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is cool and it's amazing in terms of all these people that reached out. But what if I had collected the emails or some way to get in contact with these folks after the article did well? Because my second article, while it got readership, definitely didn't have the same amounts as my first. So I decided to create a Substack. Newsletters were and still are very popular at the time. Decided to create a Substack, studying the bi-directional relationship between artists and their fans. And I, every week, then sometimes, every other week, I would just study like, okay, this is something really interesting that happened within fandom, and how do we break it down and really dissect it in a way that not only helps artists, but the people who work with artists. And so I did that for about 2 years, and it grew and led to some really amazing opportunities. I do want to highlight, though, I never had more than 1,000, 1,500, maybe max, actual subscribers at one time. And I was very thoughtful around keeping the content for a specific type of community. I realized quickly that it wasn't like music fans themselves that were following Stan, but more like folks that worked at labels, folks starting independent labels, artists, different stakeholders within the industry, but seemed like they never really had space for content like this before. And so by doing that, we built a really great, or I like to think I built a really great relationship with our readers. And so when I was thinking about starting Stan, the startup, I actually reached out to a few of my readers that were in the tech and venture space, and was lucky enough that they cut me our first angel checks for Stan.
Did you publish an article saying, hey, I'm going to start a business, who wants to invest, or how did that come about?
No, I didn't. I was super, I had a lot of meetings. So I would like meet with people around just like the intersection of music, tech, and venture during the time I was doing this, because they just wanted to like talk music, tech, and venture. Interestingly enough, I would, operate in these dual capacities, I guess, sometimes representing the bank, but also like that was at places because they wanted to hear me speak about music and tech. And so I was really grateful and lucky, I'd say, to be able to build like an actual like network in the space within like VCs or angel investors who cared a lot about that space and also knew how I thought about the space.
As someone that's very interested in music and tech and venture, I did a little bit of time in venture. How big is that scene and who are the leaders? Because I'm just personally curious how that's unfolding.
Yeah, I would say, and this is something that I learned working with like the corp venture arms of music labels, is I think that obviously like there's things that are branded as music tech, things that are branded in some ways as the creator economy. And then how I like to think about things in the sense of like, maybe in some ways even music adjacent. And a great example is, I remember I used to pull a list of companies that I thought were interesting for investors in kind of like the music tech space. And at one time they were like, Denisha, think about it this way, like we're looking at biometrics companies for security, because if an artist is too scared to perform at a show because of stalkers or whatever, now the show won't be as big or can't sell as many tickets as possible. And I use that example before answering your question, not to give the cheesy, like everyone is a music tech investor, but I actually would like encourage all of us to expand our thinking deeper than we think. Now, what I will say is most times for music tech, you are going to be operating right in the beginning in terms of pre-seed investors. And pre-seed investors aren't, just like generalist pre-seed investors, aren't the most excited about music tech or the creator economy, maybe the creator economy less so. And I think that's because they've been burned a few times from decades past. But with that being said, I think the folks at Techstars Music do phenomenal, obviously do phenomenal work. I would say a lot of the corp venture arms of major labels, obviously they're making bets, but they typically tend to do it at like seed, series A. So I don't know how many pre-seed companies you'll see. Angel checks from prior executives in the music industry, to the extent that you can build that relationship in a decent amount of time. But you see like managers like Troy Carter or even Mike Opitz at CAA has written some checks. Folks that have actually seen or garnered money from the industry are going to be your best bet, because given some of the archaic nature still of entertainment in the music industry in general, it can be very scary to a tech and venture investor how it operates.
So it's really entertainment investors are the ones who generalize, but then also go specific to music.
Exactly. CAA has a joint venture with NEA, with Connect Ventures. I would say corporate venture arms in entertainment that have started some tranches, some bucket of capital, or prior industry executives that you've seen make angel investments in the past. If you're trying to get them to make an investment net new, probably would be an uphill battle.
Do you still publish your newsletter to these people, or have you kind of shifted everyone into your startup, Stan? And can you maybe explain who you've raised from and how much you've raised to date?
Yeah, sure. So we do still publish content, and just editorial, I think, will always be a strong part of the company. And as a result, we can build our community. And I feel like if we're helping artists build their fans, we always need to be learning about new strategies around building our fan base, right, and growing our audience. So we very much do. And then in terms of how much we've raised a little bit over 350K. Some of our investors include Andy Weissman, a partner at Union Square Venture, Microtraction, a pre-seed firm that focuses on Africa and founders in and out of Africa, and then Visible Hands, which is a great pre-seed seed firm supporting underrepresented founders.
When did you close on the capital, the 350 grand?
Yeah, so we closed on the capital late last year.
Nice, cool. And who is the person from USV?
Andy Weissman.
Cool. And it's interesting for the audience to listen. That's basically his vote of confidence of saying, hey, I believe that in 2 years from now, you're going to be a company we can give the $3 to $10 million check to. So that's very impressive to be able to raise from someone like that this early on.
Thank you.
How are you approaching the artist side of this? Because you really are kind of building a two-way marketplace here in some ways.
Yeah. And thank you so much for touching on that, because that's been a journey and a struggle. It always is kind of the chicken and the egg. So that's a great, I guess, vote of confidence again for having a community. It was really easy to pull on the newsletter again, pull on the community of people, like actually getting to know the people behind the email. Okay, they've opened it 90% of the time you've sent it. If you send an email, they probably will respond. So getting to know them and getting to talk to folks and getting introductions to artists. So that's been very helpful. What we've also learned too is like the right way to approach getting to an artist, but also working with an artist. Artists can be great and friendly, or maybe not friendly people, but they interact with a lot of people just in general in a week, a month. So, making commitments is one thing. Following up on the commitments is another thing. Most time the artist isn't going to be the individual that will help you actually execute the commitments. So and just a good reminder to anybody, regardless of what industry you work in, like the most popular, most famous person isn't necessarily always the one to actually get things done. So it's been a learning for us in terms of identifying and evaluating the proper stakeholders, knowing how to approach those stakeholders, and then also realizing how do we tie it to a certain metric or something more timely relevant for the artist. And with that being said, and the great reason to have microtraction on our cap table when we think about Africa is it was really important to me to focus on artists from the continent, especially as we work to hit product market fit. And I think that's because those artists typically, one, like Afro beats or music from the continent is literally even taking off from a commercial perspective. You see the Grammys just announced the dedicated award, dedicated nomination. So I think that was really important. But these artists typically need to understand their US and their European fan bases immediately. Even being a hometown hero in, an African city doesn't maybe yield the same results financially as being the hometown hero in another city, unfortunately. And so they have the appetite, their managers, the teams have the appetite to really try new things.
What percentage of the artists are you trying to have come from Africa versus United States artists? Like, break me down. What's your ideal?
I don't think we've been super thoughtful about that quantitatively. I will say though, I do think right now when it comes to investing our efforts into prospecting and getting artists, we definitely spend a majority of our time focused on bringing on those artists to the platform, with the hope that that will change soon, in the sense that onboarding will be simpler. Artists and their management teams will just kind of get the feel of the product without such a need for a white glove approach. And we can have multiple case studies and examples to point to of like, these are all the things you can do, or here's how you can use the data.
Since you just closed the money at the end of last year, that you basically had 6 months to build with that capital, where are you standing with the product? Like, do you have your first case study from an artist, or are you working along that journey path?
So we launched the product, or the product was done. We tested it in January, launched it in February. So that was really, really exciting. We think about Stan in two ways, right? Collecting data on artists in general. So we can pick an artist and start to collect data on them. But important caveat, we collect data on the fan identification level. So we create or run campaigns so that the fans identify themselves with the goals that we can use all the information from basically raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm a fan, to give them or create better experiences for them. So that's a very different distinction maybe in how people think about music data and music analytics startups in general.
Can you give us an example of Can you give us an example of how you're collecting that data?
Yeah. So the way, or our initial entry point into doing this, is somewhat inspired by the game HQ Trivia, if you're familiar with it. But we run trivia games around artists. Sometimes they are co-created with the artists. Sometimes they are, just created by us and our editorial team. And sometimes, and these are, to be honest, what I think have been the most fun ones, they're created with fan pages or stands themselves, who really pride themselves on knowing a lot about these artists. And so as a result, we run them live. So we can have a host and which would be like an artist, or even their manager or DJ or whoever. And we also have them offline. So you can go in, hey, I'm a huge Burna Boy fan. You know, Burna Boy's doing City Fields July 8th. I want to win tickets. Let me go on, play, see how much I know, see if I've accumulated enough points, and then redeem prizes through our rewards marketplace. So the fans are really excited, especially the biggest ones, to redeem, you know, try and learn, see how much they know, but also redeem their prizes. But interestingly enough, I think for the true like purists of the artists, they get really excited about also learning new things.
Are you, as you're asking them questions about the artist, are you also throwing in personal questions about the fan to get their unique information?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the beginning of their onboarding, they connect their email. They can also connect their phone number, and then we go through a brief questionnaire that tells us about them as a fan. So we get to know what streaming platform they use, which is very important because a lot of artists are looking at data just based on which platform maybe is giving them the most comprehensive data, but that doesn't always mean that that platform is actually representative of your audience. And so I think about like for African artists, you know, Spotify came to most African countries 2 years ago. And Audiomack has been killing it in the market. Audiomack, Boomplay. So you're probably going to get more directionally accurate data about your fan base, looking at your stats from Audiomack as an African artist than maybe these other platforms, or at least if you're going to plan maybe an
Audiomack is the same as Spotify. It's a streaming platform.
Yes, correct. Audiomack is great with discovery, and has just done really well in West Africa, or Sub-Saharan Africa in general. So I think that's another great example. So we go in and we ask all those questions. We also get to know their birthday, let them say self-proclaimed who's their favorite artist, and then their favorite song at the moment. We have started to incorporate in some of the games just things about the fan, like little things about the fan, or maybe how they'd want the artist to show up for them. And then we also have another feature called Moments of Magic, which is essentially the modern day version of fan mail. You can write a letter to your favorite artist and, you know, attach a video, attach a picture, whatever, and categorize moments in your life that are coming up. So everything from maybe graduation to if you just got a job promotion or other things. I think, you know, J. Cole is such a great example of this, but giving artists the opportunity, and sometimes they want to, right? They want to show up for their fans similar to how they show up for them, but like it's kind of hard. They don't actually know you.
Yeah, I mean, J. Cole had one of the coolest kind of crossing the chasm from fan to artist things I've ever seen this past year. When he went out and he found a random beat on YouTube, I think it was. And it was from a producer who had 0 listens, had no followers. And J. Cole, with his, you know, billion+ streams, cold messages this guy and does a song with him and helps him start his career. So
J. Cole and like everything Dreamville has done continues to be like one of my favorite blueprints, to Dollar to Dream, to letting fans go to his house with 2014 Forest Hills Drive. Like, I just think he's a force.
I didn't know about that. He let people go to his house.
Yeah. So I was actually in college. I remember I was upset at finals and I had won, so I couldn't go to North Carolina. But I ended up giving it to like another fan. And so so the album was called 2014 Forest Hills Drive. That actually used to be his childhood home.
No, I know the album very much. You won the tickets to go meet him and you turned it down?
Yeah. So he a bunch of people though won tickets. I think he made it into like a museum for the week, and let fans go into his old like childhood bedroom, really understand like the mind space he was in, I guess, when he wrote the album. And I don't know how much more like genuine it gets than that.
And really at the core of it, that's the type of stuff you're trying to enable. And it's more importantly, just what you're trying to do. I think it's where the general trend of the whole industry seems to be going.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, you know, as consumers, we are so gifted with choice, but we want to feel compensated, and compensation doesn't mean money, but appreciated for spending our time and our money and being rewarded. And so far I feel like the only places really getting it right are like airlines. I could talk to you about like Delta Sky Miles all day, or credit card companies, have
Yeah.
seemed to do this in some ways better than, like, why doesn't J. Cole know if I go to Dreamville Fest? That's my 5th time seeing him. And why can't I get upgraded to a front row seat for my support of him over the years? I think it's time that artists can be empowered with information to start offering like that level of personalization in their fan experience.
How does that information and that data start to get unlocked?
Yeah. So one, or how we think about it first, right, is the fan identification piece. Going beyond, and we know why streaming platforms might be smart about holding on to the customer, right? Because they don't want to truly empower a direct to fan experience, because then why do you need them? So one, letting fans actually identify themselves as Stan. On the consumer side, we like to think of ourselves as like a music passport, right? So we will be, and we're starting with music, but really like anything in which you're a fan. I think of there's a great, like, they said it's a take on the Andy Warhol quote that in the future, people aren't going to be famous for 15 minutes. They're going to be famous to 15 people. And so when you think about that, it's like everybody is a varying level of a fan. Everyone's a fan their whole lives. The level of intensity and maybe what they're a fan of changes, but it doesn't change that their whole lives they're fans. And so with that, there should be something that gets to track this fandom. Before, maybe we used to have vinyls or t-shirts or whatever it was. And that's kind of, or even your MySpace, right? Whatever the song you were playing. But that's kind of shifted beyond maybe a song on an Instagram story, which is a lot more cyclical. So the first part is really letting fans identify themselves. I guess alongside with the name Stan, it's maybe exciting or scary in terms of how much information they're excited to share to get a deeper connection with the artist. Then it looks like partnerships, right? And partnerships into access to other types of information that give us a fuller picture. Some of it will be available without like a true, what we call like data partnership, just thanks to public APIs, right? If you tell us, I'm Denisha, I live here, blah, blah. I can probably verify my Twitter, verify my Instagram, do things that paint a bigger scale to let you know I'm me. But then other things like how many concerts did I go to is more of a conversation with the Ticketmasters or the Dices of the world, right? Or even Eventbrite, right? For early artists. So then it'll require those types of partnerships so that we can really understand on a full scale where how this person is interacting with the artist, and also how they spend their time and their money.
So I think one of the most interesting parts about startups is that it's essentially an experiment that you're just going through this journey trying to figure out what's going to work. So I heard earlier you say Stan is a consumer app, right? So consumer facing. In what you're just saying, it sounds like there's a very important missing, almost like enterprise level connector between all these different platforms. So taking a step back from music specifically and now just diving into the startup mindset, are you keeping all options on the table? Like if this ends up pure enterprise with no consumer brand, are you okay with that? How are you thinking about building this company over the first few years?
Totally. And that's been a journey. The music industry, I think, notoriously can be a tough one to crack. So in some ways, the consumer traction has shown us that there is a viable environment for this product, while also learning how to translate the product to like what should be our actual customers, which are stakeholders in the music industry. In a lot of ways, and as a startup founder myself, I think a lot about data analytics, how to run a SaaS company, and what it looks like to show up B2B at the pre-seed stage.
Mhm.
With that being said, like, we're completely open to all options. And in the near future, a lot of different stakeholders in the industry are trying to get closer to the fan, whether that's the labels themselves, to, increase the catalogs of the artists, or tour promoters, right? Like the Live Nations, to increase ticketing for these artists. So I definitely see a world where some of that technology can be more whitelisted or adopted in that way, to continue to provide a great experience, while still, letting these companies control and maybe own the brand in terms of how they show up with consumers. So definitely a tricky one, only in the sense that spending so much time with the fans in the stands, I feel like we really are able to get a pulse for what they want and how to advise artists, to show up. And so with it being or turning into a pure B2B or SaaS play, obviously maybe some of that could get lost in the sauce.
Yeah, I think, from my last business, I was very set on this vision of consumer. And there was this whole money making opportunity in a very parallel product, but on the enterprise space that I basically just, wrote off.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to understand how open-minded you are to this, because at the early stage at, 350K, like it's totally up in the air. Your clear
Yeah.
advantage is that, everyone on the business side, the labels, the venture people that will back this. You have a strong VC backing. So I'm really curious how you're thinking through the dynamics of, how do I hold my vision in my head versus how do I test
Yeah.
and experiment and make sure something's going up and to the right through data?
Yeah, I think and what we've been finding as we run some of these experiments is like taking it all the way. And when I say that, it's like you are constantly assuming things and then proving them, but that still doesn't mean you've taken it all the way, right? So we could assume that if we built a consumer app that around fandom, that fans would want to get on the app. Okay, yes, I can say we've proven that now. We can assume that artists and their management teams would want access to their data. Yes, we know that. Now, can we, or maybe our initial assumption was, given that data, right, given artists and their management teams that data, they would then be able to use it in a way that could quantifiably justify the product, or give us case studies for why other artists should use this. But artists are busy, right? Especially growing artists, they're touring, they're doing press, they're doing other things. So what we're finding now is that, especially in these early stages, this pre-seed product market fit stage, it's kind of up to us to take, okay, here's all this great fan information that we have and we're giving you. But we're not just going to give it to you. We're going to work with you to actually co-create and show you what fan experiences could look like, track those metrics, and really work with invest in you. Obviously that's not something that works at scale, but the old startup adage is do things that don't scale. So I think it's okay.
Yeah. It's a great Paul Graham quote. So what are some of the metrics? Maybe what's your top number one metric that an artist is looking for your help with?
Yeah. So most artists have great amount of listeners and followers, but it does not convert to actual true fans. This might be contested, but I created my own framework for how to measure true fans. And to me, it's a concept of time and money, right? Time, money, and available artist offerings in comparison to what the consumer can adequately patronize. So if I am a billionaire and I buy block seats to your show, okay, right? Because it's a penny or it's a drop in the bucket compared to what I have to offer. If I'm a college student, I listen to you 70% of the time when I'm on Spotify, and I'm barely making any money, but I buy a $20 seat at that show. I can guarantee you, if we're just going to use J. Cole, or you go to Dollar in a Dream, in 5 years, when J. Cole does Dreamville Fest in North Carolina, hopefully you've graduated, you have a job, you're making some disposable income. I'd bet that the college student who spent $20 at the show before is more likely to buy a flight, buy their tickets to attend than the billionaire who got box seats because what happened to be the hottest thing in town that week or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's how we think about fandom. There's no really nice way just yet to say, okay, this is how many listeners you have, this or followers, and then this is how many are true fans. But ideally, the data will eventually allow us to deliver that metric. But what artists are measuring right now is listeners, listeners or streams. If I was to go a little bit deeper, Spotify did just come out with a data point that I really like and I'm excited about. And it's called active listeners versus passive listeners. So the active listeners are the listeners that are that actively sought out your music on the platform, versus the passive listeners being listeners that were directed to your music, maybe via, I put on Spotify, space out and do my work, or through a playlist or something like that. And what you found is, a lot of artists are pushing for the editorial playlist coverage. They're pushing to be included in that, but it can give false positives in some ways because it's background music for many listeners.
And the way that the Spotify game works is an artist basically goes and applies to Spotify's program. They have a list of curators. Those people actually listen to your song and decide if they're going to put you on one of their top playlists. If so, hundreds of thousands of listens, you're off to the race. There's also smaller independent playlist curators. And if you get on one of theirs, you can get 5,000, 10,000 listens. So what you're saying is that's awesome. And it looks nice from a vanity perspective. But if you measure the fandom, those listeners aren't probably that engaged. They're not actively seeking that artist out. They just happen to listen to that song because it was in their way on Spotify.
Yeah. So you have many artists who will use those stats to feel like they should be at a certain position, right? They should have certain billing at a show. They should come out at a certain time. They should have a certain length of their set list. And unfortunately, it's like let's get a bit on the same page, or let's all be on the same page, because really high numbers there does not convert to pure fandom. Or maybe it's a step on the way, but I don't think we can quantify it as that just yet.
And there's not any sort of easy way to move people from Spotify or Apple Music into your email newsletter, because there's no way to communicate.
I think even I forgot what artist this is, but I don't even know if there's right now an easy way with some of these social media services to move them to listening to the whole song. I mean, there's been so many songs. It's even happened to me where I've been in public and was listening to a song, and then I hear a 20-second part and I'm like, oh, I've heard this song on TikTok. But I didn't even associate the song until I heard that 20-second clip. And so you have many artists who are maybe famous for 15 seconds or famous for 20 seconds and haven't even, and through no fault of their own, but haven't been able to yet convert that to a full listen of the song. So as there's more ways probably to get discovered or have your music discovered, it definitely is more difficult.
So the reason I love music is because it's very entrepreneurial. Like every story is unique, usually starts in a room or a basement or a garage. It's very, very entrepreneurial. But that being said, I think a lot of artists have kind of this starving artist mindset where, it's either let's get big or nothing. I need 1 million views. I need to look fancy. There seems to be a new business model emerging where you can essentially build a small business around just one artist. through
Yeah.
selling early access to your songs, selling a subscription to your community. So can you talk about that new business model, and
Yeah.
specifically, like, why should artists think of themselves as a small business as opposed to a potential celebrity?
Yeah, I think many people have read the essay, hopefully, about a thousand true fans.
Hmm.
And I think it continues to be something that reigns through. If I was just to compare it as someone who's building a startup right now, right? And like you said, we're at the pre-seed stage, right? Trying to hit product market fit, find our audience, get repeatable sales, get people to patronize the platform. We can't operate, whether it's from our advertising spend or just how we navigate through the world, at like thinking we're a series B, C, D, E, whatever it is, company. And I really think a lot of artists need to think about it that way. In some ways, my perception of venture has changed, in the sense that, coming from Silicon Valley Bank, you saw three things. You saw the startups that maybe were slow to start and then catapulted into really like following the venture growth curve. You saw the startups that were slow to start, maybe raise some capital, never really raised additional capital after that, but had a like viable business. And so their 500K they had raised maybe was convertible debt. They could pay it back and still operate their business. They didn't have to shutter the business. And then you saw others that ran for the hills so fast. And again, nothing wrong with this, because that is what venture is designed and encourages you to do. But ran for the hills so fast that literally it's crash and burn, right? Like once you realize it's not working, runway is probably non-existent, and all options are exhausted, we're shuttering the company. So you saw all those options, right? And I think that unfortunately, as an artist, that you have to like take heed to that, in the sense of what type of artist you want to be. You have the artists that come with a big industry push and maybe are hot for 6 months to a year, that every award show, you clearly can tell there's the industry trying to catapult them into success. Never really happens. And then we probably can't even tell you who those people are now.
And
You
that
have the
is,
artists that,
to put that into
yeah, go ahead.
venture terms, that's comparable to the company that raises a 30 million seed round because they have a rock star founder, and
Yeah.
then you never hear from them past that press release.
Yeah, the product doesn't even come out,
Doesn't
really.
exist. Yeah, no product, just a great
There's
brand name.
no product. And then you have these artists that I think are kind of slow burns, like artists that fandoms and communities, like for example, I'm a big No Name fan. Some people know No Name, some people don't. But
J.
yeah,
Cole
I'm,
and
I'm
her had an issue there, right? Yeah. Anyways,
yes, I
sorry.
wrote about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very passionate about being a No Name fan, and whenever she decides to or wants to release new music, I will still be there. And I think that gives her as an artist, she's launched a book club, she's launched a lot of other initiatives. It gives you a certain freedom knowing that regardless of how or when, if it comes back, you'll be there. And then I think there's artists that are quite thoughtful, and in some ways, maybe even Ice Spice was good at this. You start in some ways as a startup and an upstart, and then you do get bigger resources behind you. Or even you look at certain African artists like a Burna Boy, he is on a spaceship, but when it came time to really expand into the American and UK market, he partnered with major labels to make that happen. So I also think there's a give and pull too. If you have your maybe home market or home turf down, fine. But then it gives you more leverage to get into advantageous partnerships. Think of a Russ, with companies with your own leverage, like in deals that make sense for you and that aren't bound for years and years and years when you can't wait to get out. You can kind of say, let's see if this works, and if not, cool.
Yeah, I going with that metaphor of how artists are like startups. Russ is a great example of a bootstrapped company. So it took him, maybe 9 years to get his first hit. he was producing everything himself. He was putting all the albums out himself as the producer, writer, singer, songwriter, mixing, mastering, which very much is like a bootstrap startup. There was no capital behind it. It was going to take 10 years. It's total slog. It kind of pushed away. So it is interesting to think about that. And, running with that theme, two questions. How do you get your first $1,000 of revenue as Stan, the startup?
Yeah.
And how do you think about an artist? How should they get their first $1,000 of revenue?
Yeah. So back to the essay of doing things that don't scale. We thankfully have gotten our first $1,000 of revenue, but it didn't come from, I guess, the SaaS platform itself. We threw conferences that took a case study model to direct to fan and building the fan base approach, and we're able to sell tickets and make revenue that way, which I think is a testament to what Stan as a SaaS platform serves to be, but also the importance in today's world of editorial and distribution, right? We might not get an artist today, but we get a manager's attention through an article. And 3 months down the line, they're like, you know what, actually, let's give this thing a try. So I think that's very important. Like you said, building something or growing something, even if you do have a lot of money at your disposal, is a slog, right? It's day in, day out. You try a lot of things. You don't know what will work. Sometimes the market just, there's other things going on. So for Stan, that was very helpful. From the SaaS platform, though, what I will say is our goal is to identify so many fans, or a comfortable amount of fans for artists, that for them to continue to get access to that data and to their own fan information, they pay a monthly fee. And the thought behind that is, if an artist has a label that's doing some of that great direct to fan work, whether it's creating a newsletter for them or, taking phone numbers, whatever it may be, if the artist chooses to leave the label, that's effectively that label's IP. So even if they're going to another label, they're choosing to break out as independent, they effectively don't have any access to their fan data. And so helping artists understand how valuable it is to, make long-term efforts to collect and garner that fan data, and two, to invest in yourselves to continue to have access to it.
It's kind of comparable to the media industry, where you'll see these anchors that were on TV that got a bunch of followers to their company-owned Twitter account.
Yeah.
Now they leave, and there's been 100 of them who over the last 5 years have built Substacks that have gotten to thousands of dollars each month.
Yeah.
And again, it's the same model. It's, I don't need this big backing anymore in the internet age. I can just put out quality content and people will pay me for it as basically a thank you for the effort.
Exactly. And I think that, hopefully, or in the future, that approach will continue to grow as more and more companies want access to audiences and eyeballs. I think about, like, what does it look like for companies to effectively subsidize an experience to get access to a certain part of an audience? As something I hope we can execute down the line, for Stan, is how do we give a company access to a segmented part of an artist's audience? So if you're X brand and you want to reach college students, we can say, okay, hey, this artist actually has tens of thousands of college students across these cities. How do we create something specifically for those fans that are college students? And do everything to them. It doesn't oversaturate the artist, right? So they don't feel like, oh my God, I'm taking all these brand deals. And it just, because it's not oversaturated, because they're only reaching certain segments, and companies can hopefully get a more cost-effective way to reach certain audiences.
Very interesting. Can you dive in a little deeper on that? So using an example, who's a brand that might want to get to those college students, and how would you work that through to the artist?
College. Interestingly enough, customer acquisition for credit cards or finance products is sky high to this day. And the best time to get someone on board is probably when the need is highest, when you're kind of out on your own in college. And so you think about them working to do a campaign. I'm thinking who would probably have like a heavy college audience. Maybe no, Ice Spice trends a little lower. Meg Thee Stallion has a great female college audience. So you think about like what it looks like to create, and she went to college as well. So those experiences too just don't have to be, they don't have to be concerts. They can be, a self-care day during finals or whatever it looks like. But I think that's where it gets fun, because the artist can combine with the brand to serve a segment of their fans in a certain way that's ultimately subsidized by the brand. So the artist gets better fan affinity. The corporation or the brand gets like a deeper access based off a more trusted relationship, and fans feel seen and appreciated.
And do you take a percentage of doing the logistics there, or are you purely the data side of that and then facilitating the intro?
Yeah, so I mean, in the beginning, we will produce these events,
Yeah.
and that's really just because we want to be sure we're owning the experience.
Mhm.
Hopefully in the future, maybe it'll be an ancillary part of the business, or we'll have partners, but making sure we get that experience right, especially in the beginning, I think is so important. And
Mhm.
seeing how we did, we worked with Ghanaian artist King Promise to do a fan experience before his first North American tour. He was doing Webster Hall, and we brought together like 30 of his fans in New York for kind of a conversation about Afrobeats and where it's gone. And I always remember like two moments. We had, one fan that grew up in Columbus, Ohio, that literally like thanked him because they remember they used to get like bullied. People didn't know a lot about Africa, right? So music has made like people's understanding so much more universal. And then another fan from Taiwan that first heard his music in Taiwan, and seeing his face, like, what?
Yeah.
Even he, right, as an artist, kind of sometimes you see the numbers, you obviously see the DMs or whatever, but to see like putting a face to a name and really being in a space where it's like a conversation, like here are our stories, I think is special, and can't always just be done at scale. So in the beginning, we definitely want to make sure we're helping facilitate that in the right way.
There's also very smart ways you can leverage that content. So if there's only 30 people in the room, you can still promote it, record it, share the content. So
Exactly.
yeah. How big is
Exactly.
that artist that you just mentioned?
Yeah, King Promise he has the number one song on Apple Music in Ghana right now,
Jeez.
with Terminator. Has done UK shows, is honestly doing great. So yeah,
And
we've
so when
enjoyed
did
working.
you sign him, or what's the onboarding process to get him on board?
Yeah, so that was last October. It was a test kind of just to see like, okay, if we did this event, will people show up? And also understanding kind of what archetypes of artists work. Much to his credit, he was an artist that really interacts well with fans and interacts well with fans in person. We realized that for different artists, it's like, different strokes for different folks. So with other artists, maybe they'll do much better FaceTiming a fan, or a pre-recorded birthday message. So as we're still very much in that space of saying, okay, you can show up this way, but how do we also potentially get you to show up in these other ways? And maybe we'll bring on an artist at first to do virtual experiences, and hopefully graduate up to in person, because what we've seen and what we know about fandom is that it's the most in person, in real life, that meet and greets is like the highest emblem for these fans. But with a lot of artists too, it takes some working up to. I mean, it is emotional. It is emotional work at the end of the day, or emotional labor. So kind of exciting artists, like, no, like, if you talk to this fan, you'd be really excited about them too.
It's maybe they don't say it verbally, but it's got to be one of the key influences that keeps them going as they meet people along the
Yeah.
journey. Like
Exactly.
it's nice to listen to your own music on repeat, but eventually you need some sort of outside validation.
Exactly. Exactly.
As we're getting towards the end here, I want to let you pick, like, what is one important topic to you, whether it could be a business context or outside of business, just one thing that you'd love to talk about.
Yeah. That's a good one. I'm quite passionate about the festival experience. I think we've seen so many festivals pop up in the last few years, which is great, right? So many different concepts. Festivals concepts have even become more niche. But I think as a result, I would personally like to see some type of agency or body for consumer protections. So many times you've seen last minute cancellations of festivals after fans have already traveled, paid flight, paid accommodation, and they can't get that back. Delays in refunds, kind of like a governing body to put their stamp on things. And if I could even take it a step further, insurance, right? Insurance coming out for some of these experiences, especially when they're new. Unfortunately, you see so many fans who maybe committed their, I don't know, not their savings, but like they've committed a significant portion of money to enjoy an experience, and for them not to get that experience, or for the artist they came to see pull out, it can really be heartbreaking.
And so the way that insurance policy would work is you basically pick, like, hey, this is the artist, I want to see most. If they're not here, I don't want to be there either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. And is that
Exactly.
something you can solve with Stan, or that's just you think about that?
Not immediately. I mean, I will say a lot of platforms have gotten insurance, right? Airbnb provides insurance now. Insurance has been, I guess, reimagined in some ways. So maybe down the line or in the future, like, this is Stan approved, and the Stan approval comes with XYZ. But if somebody did it before, I don't think anybody would be upset.
That's awesome. Well, you're clearly very passionate about music. I think there is an open gap within the venture space for someone like you. It seems like, early stage understanding of music, artists, talents, that is a total overlooked space right now. So I'm excited for you to raise your next 250 grand, and we're wishing you luck from the whole community over here.
Thank you so much for having me.